On August 12, 1847, in Beaufort County, South Carolina, two of the wealthiest plantation owners made a wager that would shock an entire community and leave one family destroyed forever. Colonel Nathaniel Pritchard approached his longtime rival, Judge Marcus Holloway, with a challenge so audacious that 60 witnesses stood frozen in disbelief when they heard the terms. "Your strongest slave," Pritchard said, his voice carrying across the courthouse steps, "against my 5 daughters." The crowd erupted in confusion. What kind of challenge could possibly pit a grown man against 5 young women? What had Pritchard been doing behind the closed gates of his estate that made him so confident? And why did his daughters, when they finally appeared on the day of the wager, look at the gathered crowd with eyes that held no light, no fear, no emotion at all? 3 physicians who examined those girls after what happened would leave South Carolina within the year, unable to speak of what they'd witnessed. County officials sealed the records for over 6 decades. And one of those daughters would die before autumn came. Before we continue with the story of what Colonel Pritchard wagered that August morning, I want to ask you something. This channel brings you the darkest, most disturbing historical mysteries that most people have never heard about. If you're fascinated by the hidden horrors of America's past, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. And leave a comment telling us what state you're listening from. We love knowing where our audience discovers these forgotten tales. Now let's return to Beaufort County in 1847, when a father's obsession was about to be revealed in the most horrifying way imaginable. The story truly begins 9 years earlier, in spring 1838, when Nathaniel Pritchard's wife Elizabeth died from complications following her 6th pregnancy. Beaufort County in 1847 sat at the heart of South Carolina's plantation aristocracy. The Pritchard family had occupied their estate, Willow Bend, since 1782. Nathaniel Pritchard was considered unusual even by low country standards, educated at the College of Charleston and having spent 3 years in Prussia studying agricultural science and military history. He spoke obsessively of systematic improvement and the science of maximizing potential. After his wife's death, Pritchard withdrew almost completely from society. He hired a housekeeper and governess, but otherwise sealed his household from outside interference. The daughters, who had once attended church and social gatherings, disappeared from public view. When neighbors inquired, Pritchard explained he was overseeing their education personally, developing a comprehensive system that would prepare them to be exceptional women. What people didn't know was what education meant inside Willow Bend. The training had begun simply: extra riding practice, lessons in navigation and endurance, exercises he claimed would strengthen their characters. But it escalated over years into something far darker. Sessions grew longer and more demanding. Mistakes were punished with isolation, food restriction, or forced repetition until physical collapse. Pritchard kept detailed logs measuring everything: how long they could ride without rest, how much weight they could carry, how well they performed under stress. Judge Marcus Holloway, whose plantation bordered Pritchard's, had known Nathaniel since childhood. They'd never been friends. Their families had disputed property boundaries for generations, but they maintained expected civility. Holloway was everything Pritchard was not: gregarious, politically connected, comfortable with tradition. The true break came in July 1847 during a gathering at the Beaufort courthouse. Holloway was discussing labor efficiency, insisting that natural physical advantages made male workers superior for tasks requiring strength or endurance. Pritchard interjected with a comment that stunned the room. "You're wrong, Marcus. Physical capacity isn't inherent, it's cultivated. Properly trained, my daughters could best any man here in any test of endurance or discipline." The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter. Holloway, red-faced, assumed Pritchard was being philosophical. "Come now, Nathaniel. Your daughters are fine ladies, I'm sure, but let's not be absurd. I'm stating fact based on years of systematic observation. Name your challenge." Emboldened by whiskey and audience, Holloway pressed forward. "An endurance race, 30 miles through the hardest terrain between our properties. Your 5 daughters against my strongest worker. 3 days from now. Loser signs over the disputed 50-acre timber tract. 50 acres of prime timber was worth thousands. The wager was serious. They shook hands while the room watched in amazement. Most assumed Pritchard would back out. What none of them knew was that Nathaniel Pritchard never made wagers he couldn't win. August 12, 1847, broke hot and heavy. By 7 o'clock, when spectators began arriving at the starting point, temperature was climbing toward 94 degrees. Nearly 60 people assembled, neighboring planters, their wives, county officials drawn by novelty. Dr. Thaddeus Cromwell came to ensure no one was seriously injured. The course covered 30 miles through pine forest, across creeks, over sandy ridge country, through palmetto thickets. 3 checkpoints would verify completion. Judge Holloway arrived first with Samuel, the man he'd selected. Samuel was 32, over 6 feet tall, known as an exceptional horseman. But witnesses noticed immediately his expression, deeply uncomfortable, eyes fixed on some distant point, jaw set tight. Then the Pritchard family arrived, and the murmuring began. Colonel Pritchard rode at the front, ramrod straight. Behind came his 5 daughters in single file on identical grey mares. All wore matching dark riding habits, severe and almost military. Their postures were absolutely identical, backs straight, hands positioned precisely the same. Their faces showed no expression at all. Mrs. Catherine Sheridan would later write, "Those girls looked like dolls. Beautiful, well-made dolls, but dolls nonetheless. There was something missing from their eyes that made me want to gather my own daughters and leave." Dr. Cromwell approached to conduct preliminary examinations. He checked Samuel first, heartbeat strong, breathing normal, appropriate nervousness but physical readiness. When he approached the Pritchard daughters, Colonel Pritchard intervened. "That won't be necessary, Doctor. My daughters are in perfect health." "Sir, it's merely a precaution. I said it won't be necessary. The race begins in 5 minutes." Cromwell withdrew, disturbed. In his brief proximity, he'd noticed their hands. All 5 had calluses consistent with long hours of riding, far more than any young ladies should possess. At precisely 8 o'clock, the starting pistol fired. The 5 Pritchard daughters moved as one, horses surging forward in perfect synchronization. Samuel hesitated for 2 seconds before following. Within 30 seconds, all 6 riders had disappeared into the tree line. The first checkpoint sat at mile 10, across Willingham Creek. Dr. Cromwell and 2 officials waited. At 10:15 they heard hoofbeats. The 5 Pritchard daughters emerged in single file, still moving in eerie synchronization. They crossed without slowing, though protocol called for brief pause. Cromwell called for them to stop, but they continued as if he hadn't spoken. He noted their time. 2 hours, 15 minutes for 10 miles through difficult terrain. Fast, but not impossibly so. Samuel appeared 7 minutes later, horse lathered with sweat. When Cromwell flagged him down, Samuel actually stopped. "Son, are you all right?" Samuel stared in the direction the girls had gone. "Something wrong with those girls, sir. The way they ride ain't natural. And one of them, the smallest, she fell crossing the creek. Horse stumbled. She went into the water bleeding from her head. Bad cut, should have stopped. But her sisters rode on, and she got back on and followed. Didn't make a sound, didn't cry. Just got up and kept going." Cromwell felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Which direction?" Samuel pointed toward the ridge. "That way. But I ain't chasing them anymore, sir. This ain't right. I can't be part of it." Before Cromwell could respond, Samuel began walking his horse back toward the starting point, abandoning the race. Cromwell mounted and rode hard toward the second checkpoint, filled with urgent dread. He reached the ridge checkpoint at 11:30. Officials confirmed the Pritchard daughters had passed 20 minutes earlier. They'd noted the youngest had blood on her face and dress, but showed no distress. They'd tried to stop her, but she'd ridden past without acknowledgement. "Should we stop the race?" one asked. "We're stopping this," Cromwell decided. "Come with me." They caught up to the Pritchard daughters 3 miles from the finish line. Even from distance, Cromwell could see something was badly wrong. The formation had broken. 4 horses still moved forward, but riders were swaying. The 5th horse had stopped, its rider slumped over the animal's neck. Cromwell spurred faster. Virginia, the youngest, was unconscious. Elizabeth, the second youngest, was barely conscious, face pale and covered in blood from an untreated head wound. The 3 older girls continued riding but showed severe distress. "Stop!" Cromwell shouted. "For God's sake, stop!" The older girls kept riding as if they hadn't heard. Cromwell cut off Caroline, grabbing her horse's bridle. Up close he saw she was in shock, dilated pupils despite bright sunlight, cracked bleeding lips, blistered hands. Her eyes finally focused on him. "Please," she whispered. "We have to finish. We have to. You need medical attention. The race is over." "No, we have to finish. She cut herself off, face twisting with terror. "We have to finish." Behind them, officials reached the other girls. Virginia was completely unconscious. Elizabeth mumbled incoherently. Margaret and Anne trembled with exhaustion but still tried to move forward. Cromwell looked at Caroline with growing horror. "What has your father done to you?" Caroline's expression went blank, panic disappearing behind a doll-like mask. "We have to finish the race." Hoofbeats approached. Nathaniel Pritchard emerged, face dark with rage. "What is the meaning of this? Get out of their way." "Colonel Pritchard, your daughters need immediate medical attention." "They're fine. They've been trained for exactly this. Let them proceed." "Your youngest daughter is unconscious. The race is finished when they cross the line. You have no authority to stop them." "As a physician, I have every authority. These girls are in medical crisis." For a moment, something dangerous flashed in Pritchard's eyes. His hand moved toward the pistol at his belt. Then he seemed to recalculate, rage disappearing behind cold mask. "Of course, Doctor. I see you're correct. Let's get them home." The sudden shift was more disturbing than the rage. A wagon was sent for. By the time it arrived, news had spread. When the wagon approached Willow Bend carrying the injured girls, a crowd had gathered. Pritchard appeared every inch the concerned father. "Thank you for your concern. My daughters are tired but well. They will rest now. The race was perhaps ill-advised in this heat, but no lasting harm has been done." Dr. Cromwell insisted on examining all 5 girls. Pritchard initially refused, then relented when Cromwell threatened formal complaint. What Cromwell found during those examinations would haunt him forever. He documented it in his private medical journal. Evidence of long-term physical conditioning beyond normal or appropriate. Muscle development suggesting years of sustained exertion. Multiple healed injuries including broken fingers, fractured ribs, poorly healed collarbone. Most concerning is psychological state. Minimal affect, no emotional reaction to painful procedures, repeatedly asking if she performed adequately. When I expressed concern, Caroline stated, "Father says pain is weakness being corrected." She appears trained to suppress all natural responses to distress. His notes on the others showed similar patterns. That night he wrote, "I believe Colonel Pritchard has been conducting systematic physical conditioning on his daughters for years. The pattern of injuries, unusual muscle development, psychological conditioning to suppress pain. All suggest deliberate program, unlike anything I've encountered." Most disturbing was when Caroline began weeping silently after Pritchard left the room. She said, "Mother told me to be strong enough to run away someday, but I'm not. None of us are. He made sure we'd never be strong enough for that." When her father returned, she stopped immediately, face going blank. "I believe these women are prisoners subjected to calculated cruelty, disguised as education. However, I have no legal recourse. A father's right to discipline children is absolute in South Carolina law." Samuel's refusal to continue sparked conversations in the enslaved community. 3 days later, he requested to speak with Judge Holloway privately. What he said would be recorded years later in a deposition. "I told Judge Holloway those girls weren't right. The way they moved, didn't react when hurt, looked through people instead of at them. It reminded me of horses broken too hard. That's what had been done to those girls. When I saw the little one bleeding and climbing back on without making a sound, I knew I was watching something evil. I told him he ought to tell someone, get those girls help. He listened, but he didn't do nothing. Nobody did nothing. The disputed 50 acres went to Holloway. Technically, Pritchard had forfeited. But Pritchard showed no concern. Perhaps the land had never been the point. Perhaps the race itself was the goal, a chance to demonstrate something. In the weeks following, Willow Bend became even more isolated. Gates stayed closed, no visitors received. The daughters disappeared from even limited public view. It was as if the family had sealed itself off completely. But silence isn't stillness. Behind those gates, something was festering, building toward crisis no one outside could see coming. Months following the race saw Beaufort County gradually forget the strange spectacle. Harvest season arrived, gossip moved on. The Pritchard family remained shuttered, and most were content to let them stay that way. But some couldn't forget. Dr. Cromwell made 2 attempts to visit in September, ostensibly to check on Virginia's recovery. Both times he was turned away. The second time, he noticed someone at an upstairs window, Caroline holding something white against the glass. A piece of paper, a silent plea for help. He wrote to the Charleston Medical Society, documenting concerns without direct accusations. The response came 3 weeks later. Without evidence of immediate danger, there was no basis for intervention. The message was clear: let it go. Cromwell couldn't. He began keeping detailed notes, documenting every rumor, every odd detail, a private investigation that would continue until his death. Inside Willow Bend, Caroline was conducting her own investigation. Since her mother's death 9 years earlier, she'd lived in a world of rigid control and unnatural discipline. Her father's training had escalated from extra riding practice to something much darker. But the race had changed something. For the first time, the outside world had glimpsed what was happening. Dr. Cromwell's obvious concern, Samuel's refusal, shocked faces. Caroline had seen all of it. And she'd seen her father's reaction. Rage at interruption, then careful performance once he'd regained control. He was afraid of exposure. And fear meant vulnerability. Caroline began keeping a journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard, recording everything. Training sessions, punishments, injuries, her father's increasingly erratic behavior. She wrote in careful clinical detail. Her plan was simple: accumulate evidence. Eventually someone would find it. The truth would exist somewhere, preserved, waiting to be discovered. Miss Sarah Lindley, the governess, had been growing increasingly uncomfortable. She witnessed training sessions, saw injuries, heard cold lectures about discipline. She watched 5 girls transform from energetic children to blank-faced young women. In November 1847, she went to Judge Holloway and told him everything she'd observed over 8 years. Holloway listened with growing unease. When she finished, he said, "Miss Lindley, everything you've told me is deeply concerning. It's also legally meaningless. Colonel Pritchard is exercising his rights as a father. Unless you can present evidence meeting legal definition of criminal cruelty, an extremely high bar, nothing can be done through official channels. So these girls are simply trapped? Unless they marry and leave, or unless Colonel Pritchard dies, yes. Or unless one commits some act desperate enough to force intervention." Miss Lindley stayed, but the weight of helplessness grew heavier daily. Winter came with subtle shifts at Willow Bend. Pritchard seemed distracted, spending hours in his study poring over military manuals. Training intensified. Caroline heard him muttering about proving the concept and demonstrating reproducible results. It dawned on her with creeping horror that her father viewed the failed race not as warning, but as setback in an experiment needing refinement. He was planning something else, another demonstration. On a cold January evening, her father entered the library unexpectedly. "You're the eldest? You understand what I'm trying to accomplish?" Caroline kept her face neutral. "Yes, father. Most people are weak. They indulge weakness and call it humanity. Your mother was weak. pregnancy after pregnancy until it killed her. But you and your sisters, I've made you strong. You're perfect examples of what humans can become with proper training, and soon, everyone will see what I've created." "Created, father?" The word slipped out, his expression darkened. "Refined, improved, made into something better than nature intended." He stepped closer. "Your opinion doesn't matter. Your feelings don't matter. You exist to prove a principle. You and your sisters are my life's work, and I will not allow sentiment to compromise that work. What comes next will require absolute commitment. I'm planning another demonstration, bigger than the race, more controlled, more scientific." After he left, Caroline added to her journal, "Father is planning something worse. I don't know what yet, but I can see it in his eyes. He no longer sees us as daughters. We are specimens, experiments, proof of concept. Whatever he's planning will either expose him or destroy us completely." In February, strange purchases arrived: medical equipment, scientific instruments, books on physiology. Pritchard hired an architect to renovate an outbuilding into a training facility with specialized equipment and locks controlled from outside. In March, Caroline noticed her father giving her sisters different medications, performance enhancers, and conditioning supplements. Margaret became lethargic. Anne developed tremors. Virginia had moments where she seemed disconnected from reality. When Caroline tried to speak with them about refusing, they looked at her with dull confusion. Years of conditioning had done their work. By April, Caroline realized time was running out. She needed help from outside. She wrote a carefully worded letter describing the new facility, the medications, her sister's deteriorating condition. She ended with simple plea: someone must intervene before father's next experiment begins. Getting the letter out took weeks of planning. Finally, in early May, Caroline slipped the letter to one of the enslaved women who did laundry. The woman agreed to try passing it to someone at Holloway's property, though she made clear the risk. 3 days later, Colonel Pritchard assembled his daughters. His face was cold with fury. He held Caroline's letter. "Who wrote this?" Silence. Pritchard walked slowly. "I know one of you wrote this treasonous letter accusing me of cruelty." He stopped before Caroline. "It was you." The woman who tried to deliver it confessed. "Everyone knows your handwriting." He crumpled the letter. "I'm disappointed. I believed you understood. But you're still weak, still sentimental. Father, Silence. Your sister has betrayed our family. What's the appropriate response?" The younger girls said nothing. Complete isolation. Caroline will be moved to the new facility until she's ready to recommit. The rest continue regular training. Remember what happens to those who betray discipline. That evening, Caroline was locked in the renovated outbuilding, a single room with high windows, furnished only with a cot and training equipment. Before locking her in, Pritchard leaned close. "You wanted outside intervention. You'll get your wish. In 2 weeks, I'm hosting physicians and scientists from Charleston. They're coming to observe a demonstration of my training methods, a controlled scientific exhibition that will prove my theories. You and your sisters will demonstrate your capabilities under rigorous conditions while being observed and measured. By then, you'll understand that cooperation is your only option." The door closed. The lock turned. Caroline was left alone, realizing her attempt to get help had accelerated the very thing she'd feared. She counted hours until the demonstration, wondering if survival was even the best outcome anymore. Outside her window, spring turned toward summer, and Willow Bend remained silent, its terrible secrets waiting for the moment when everything would either be exposed or buried forever. The woman who'd attempted to deliver Caroline's letter was named Ruth. When Pritchard confronted her, she'd been terrified but also relieved. Finally, someone might know the truth. Pritchard didn't physically harm her. He simply sold her 2 days later to a broker specializing in sending enslaved people to brutal Mississippi Delta labor camps, effectively a death sentence. The message was clear, but Ruth had shown the letter to Samuel first, asking him to read it aloud. Samuel memorized its contents. When Ruth disappeared, he knew exactly what had happened and why. He went to Judge Holloway again, refusing to leave until heard. Samuel recited Caroline's letter word for word. "Judge Holloway, sir, I know I'm speaking out of turn, but that man is going to kill those girls. Maybe not all at once, but he's going to kill them. Ruth's already paid for trying to help. Someone with power needs to do something." Holloway was silent. Finally, "What do you expect me to do? March onto his property and demand he stop? I have no legal authority. The law says a father has absolute authority." "Then the law is wrong, sir." The statement hung dangerously, but Holloway didn't react with anger. He looked tired. "Perhaps it is, but wrong laws are still laws until changed. That takes decades. These girls don't have decades." "No, sir." "So, what are you going to do?" "What I can within boundaries of law and custom. It won't be enough, but it's something." Holloway made a series of casual visits to neighbors, steering conversations toward the Pritchard family. He mentioned concerns about the upcoming scientific demonstration, suggesting several neighbors should attend to ensure appropriate conduct. His real purpose: ensure witnesses. Public accountability might be the only protection these girls had. He also wrote Dr. Cromwell, asking him to attend as medical observer. Cromwell agreed immediately. Meanwhile, Caroline remained isolated. Twice daily, food and water came through a small opening. Her father visited once 3 days in, informing her that her cooperation in the demonstration was expected. "You'll participate fully. You'll perform at maximum capability. You'll demonstrate everything I've taught you without complaint or hesitation. If you refuse, your sisters will be punished in your place." Caroline's response was quiet. "Yes, father. This demonstration will determine everything. I've invited 12 physicians, 3 professors from the Medical College of South Carolina, several prominent planters. They'll observe, measure, document, and they'll finally understand that my methods work." After he left, Carolyn tried to think. Isolation was taking its toll. She'd lost track of time. But she forced focus. Her father expected cooperation. What if she did the opposite? What if she used the demonstration itself to expose him? An idea formed. Risky, possibly futile, but it was all she had. On May 19, 1848, observers began arriving at Willow Bend. Carriages came throughout the morning, carrying Charleston's medical elite and prominent planters. Pritchard greeted them warmly, playing innovative researcher eager to share breakthrough findings. The renovated outbuilding resembled a medical theater, chairs arranged in semicircle facing an open demonstration area. Medical equipment lined one wall, devices for measuring heart rate, lung capacity, strength, endurance. Everything designed to look scientific, objective, clinical. At 10 o'clock, Pritchard called the gathering to order. 23 men sat ready. "Gentlemen, thank you. Today, you'll witness something unprecedented. For nearly a decade, I've conducted systematic experiment in physical and mental conditioning using my 5 daughters as subjects. My hypothesis: human capabilities aren't fixed by nature, but can be dramatically enhanced through proper discipline and elimination of weakness. What you'll observe today is proof." He gestured toward a door. "My daughters have undergone rigorous training in endurance, pain tolerance, physical strength, mental discipline. They've been conditioned to overcome natural limitations through systematic desensitization and progressive challenge. Today, they'll demonstrate these capabilities while you observe and measure. Everything will be documented, reproducible." One physician raised his hand. "Colonel Pritchard, I must express concern about ethical implications. These are your daughters, not laboratory subjects. They are both, and they've benefited immeasurably. They're stronger, more capable, more disciplined than any women of their station." He opened the door. The 5 Pritchard daughters entered. Observers fell silent. They moved in single file, steps synchronized, postures identical. Simple matching dresses, hair pulled back severely. Faces showed no expression. They looked like 5 versions of the same automaton. Caroline was at front, pale and thinner from isolation, but posture rigidly perfect. She kept eyes fixed forward. Gentlemen, my daughters, ages 17, 16, 15, 13, and 11. Over the next 4 hours, they'll demonstrate various capabilities. You're welcome to examine, measure, verify everything is genuine. I encourage skepticism. That's science. What followed would be described differently by every man present. The daughters were put through progressively demanding physical tests, maintaining difficult positions for extended periods, holding weights until muscles trembled, performing repetitive exercises without pause. Throughout it all, minimal reaction, no complaints, no signs of distress. When they faltered physically, they recovered and continued without being told. Doctor. Cromwell grew increasingly disturbed. He'd seen soldiers drilled, but this was different. These were young women conditioned to suppress every natural human response to distress. Colonel Pritchard, how long have they been training at this intensity? 9 years, Doctor, since shortly after their mother's death. Progressive and systematic. And have there been injuries? Of course. Injuries are part of growth. Broken bones heal stronger. Pain teaches adaptation. Several observers shifted uncomfortably. Then Pritchard announced the final demonstration. Endurance test. Each daughter would run continuously on a specially designed treadmill until reaching physical exhaustion. Medical observers would monitor vitals throughout. The goal: demonstrate superior conditioning and pain tolerance. This was Caroline's opportunity. During endurance tests, her father couldn't easily intervene without compromising scientific validity. She would have time to communicate. The treadmills were arranged so all 5 ran simultaneously facing the audience. As her father gave the command to begin, Caroline started running, but differently than her sisters. While they maintained mechanical precision, Caroline let her form deteriorate slightly. Then as she ran, she began to speak between breaths. 9 years of this, every day. Broken bones, hunger, isolation, not training, torture, not science, cruelty. He calls us experiments, says we're proof that humans can be broken and remade. Pritchard moved to silence her, but Dr. Cromwell stood. Colonel, let her speak. If this is scientific demonstration, we should observe all data. Other observers nodded. Pritchard was trapped by his own insistence on rigor. Caroline kept speaking, and now her sisters were listening. Something in her voice was penetrating their conditioning. He starved us to test how little we'd survive on, broke our bones to see how we'd heal, isolated us for days, told us we weren't human, just specimens. Virginia, the youngest, stumbled, stepped off. Caroline, why are we doing this? Because Father told us to, Margaret answered automatically, still running, voice wavering. No, Caroline gasped. We're doing this because he broke us, made us afraid, made us forget. We could refuse, made us forget. We're human. Elizabeth stopped. Then Anne. They stood breathing hard, looking at each other with dawning confusion. Only Margaret kept running, tears streaming as her legs maintained mechanical pace. Observers sat in stunned silence. Dr. Cromwell wrote furiously. Several physicians had stood, uncertain what to do. This had stopped being scientific demonstration and become something else. Public breakdown of conditioning Pritchard had imposed. Pritchard moved to stop the treadmills, to regain control. But Caroline, still running, raised her voice to a shout. He's been training us to be perfect. Perfect soldiers, perfect experiments. He wanted to prove humans could be conditioned like animals. He wanted to sell his methods to the military. We're not his daughters anymore, we're his product. That final word, product, hung like accusation. Pritchard forcibly stopped Caroline's treadmill, grabbing her arm hard enough to leave marks. But damage was done. The observers had heard enough, and her sisters had heard enough. Virginia was crying now, openly, first emotion in years. Elizabeth sat on the floor, blank mask cracking into confusion and fear. Anne stood frozen, trembling. Margaret had stopped running, staring at her father with dawning horror. "What have you done to us?" she whispered. Dr. Cromwell stood. "Colonel Pritchard, this demonstration is finished. These girls need immediate care. What I've witnessed isn't science. It's systematic abuse disguised as research." Several others voiced agreement, but Pritchard, cornered, played his final card. "You're reacting emotionally rather than scientifically. My daughters are upset because I pushed them to their limits. They'll recover. They always do. Give them rest. They'll return to normal." "Normal?" Cromwell's voice was sharp. "Colonel, there's nothing normal about this conditioning or these young women's state. You have no authority here. These are my daughters, in my home, participating voluntarily. I'm asking you all to leave. Now." Judge Holloway stepped forward. "Nathaniel, I've known you 30 years. What I've witnessed today crosses legal and moral lines. You've endangered these girls' health and sanity. I'm leaving now, but I'll be filing a report with the county magistrate. There will be official investigation. Investigate all you want. You'll find nothing illegal. A father has absolute right to educate his children. Your investigation will go nowhere." Holloway's face was grim. "Perhaps, but I'll file it. And every man here witnessed what happened. That may count for something." Observers began filing out, deeply shaken. "Doctor." Cromwell paused at the door, looking back at the 5 daughters huddled together, first time he'd seen them show mutual support. Caroline met his eyes, desperate plea there. But what could he do? As the last observer left, Pritchard turned to face his daughters. Caroline braced for rage. But what came was worse. Cold disappointment, like a scientist observing failed experiments. "You've ruined 9 years of work, all of you, especially you, Caroline. Tomorrow we begin corrective training. Everything starts over. This time, no demonstrations, no observers, no interference. Just us." As he left, locking the building, Caroline gathered her sisters close. They were crying now, conditioning finally cracking. Caroline held them and whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "We'll get out. Somehow. What happened today has to mean something." But in her heart, she knew the truth. The observers had been horrified. But horror wasn't action. Their exposure had been witnessed, documented, acknowledged. And still they remained trapped, with their father's corrective training looming. The demonstration had changed everything and nothing. The truth was known, but powerless. And that might be the cruelest revelation of all. Days following the demonstration saw Beaufort County erupt in carefully hushed scandal. The story spread with particular velocity, shocking but impossible to openly discuss. Women whispered, men debated privately. But publicly, polite society maintained silence. Judge Holloway filed his report with the county magistrate, detailed and damning. It described systematic conditioning bordering on torture, psychological manipulation, suppressing normal responses, evidence of multiple injuries over years. It requested immediate investigation. The magistrate, who'd attended university with Pritchard, read the report seriously, then filed it away and took no action. When Holloway pressed, the response was blunt. "Pritchard has broken no laws. He's educated his daughters according to his methods. Some may find them harsh, but harshness isn't criminal. Unless you can prove he's deliberately trying to kill them, there's no legal basis. The man has systematically abused those girls for 9 years. According to whose definition, law gives fathers nearly unlimited authority. Unless a judge determines immediate mortal danger, I cannot remove them. So they're simply left to his mercy, unless they marry and leave, or he dies. Yes, that's the law." Holloway left feeling the same helpless frustration others had experienced. The system had no mechanism to protect these girls from their own father. But exposure had consequences, even if not legal ones. Pritchard found himself socially isolated, Invitations ceased. Business contacts became distant. At church, other families avoided him. His pew sat empty except for himself. Inside Willow Bend, atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. Pritchard began corrective training, harsh schedule designed to re-establish control. Daughters awakened before dawn for exercises. Meals precisely measured and timed. Forbidden to speak except during designated periods. Miss Lindley instructed to monitor constantly. But something had fundamentally changed. The public exposure had reminded the daughters their situation wasn't normal. Caroline's words had planted seeds even corrective measures couldn't fully uproot. Sisters began communicating in subtle ways. Glances, small gestures, tiny rebellions. Virginia, the youngest, showed the most dramatic change. She'd been only 2 when her mother died, barely remembered life before training. But Caroline's breakdown had awakened something. She began asking questions, quietly, cautiously, but persistently. Why do we do this? What would happen if we stopped? Where would we go? Caroline tried to answer honestly while protecting her from dangerous hope. We can't stop while we're here, and we have nowhere to go. Women alone have no rights, no money, no protection. Then we're trapped forever, until something changes. What could change? Caroline didn't have an answer. In mid-June, something did change, though not as anyone expected. Margaret collapsed during morning exercises. She'd shown signs of increasing weakness for weeks. The performance enhancers their father had been administering were having adverse effects. When she fell, she didn't get back up. Dr. Cromwell was summoned. He examined Margaret and found her suffering from exhaustion, malnutrition, and what he suspected was poisoning from whatever substances Pritchard had been giving her. He insisted she needed bed rest, proper nutrition, and cessation of all training. Pritchard refused. A temporary setback. She'll recover with proper discipline. Colonel, your daughter's life is in danger. She's stronger than you think. She's 17 and weighs 92 pounds. Her body is failing. Thank you for your opinion. I'll manage my daughter's care from here. Cromwell was forced to leave, but he immediately went to Holloway. This is it, Marcus. She's dying. If ever there was grounds for emergency intervention, this is it. Holloway's face was grim. I'll go to the magistrate. But Nathaniel will argue you're overstating danger, that he's providing appropriate care. Unless Margaret actually dies, the magistrate won't act. So we wait for her to die? I'm not saying we should wait. We need another approach. What approach? Social pressure, economic pressure, making it advantageous for him to let them marry and leave, someone with honor willing to rescue them. Holloway set plan in motion carefully. He approached Pritchard in late June with business proposition. The disputed timber tract could be returned to Pritchard as marriage dowry. In exchange, Pritchard's eldest daughter would marry Holloway's eldest son. It would unite properties, resolve land dispute, establish formal alliance. Pritchard listened with cold calculation. Caroline was 17, old enough to marry. A union would repair social damage. He'd get back the timber tract, but he was suspicious. Why now, Marcus? Because despite everything, you're still my neighbor. Better to make it formal and beneficial than continue antagonism. My son needs a wife, your daughter needs to be settled. It's practical. I'll need time to consider. Of course. But Margaret's illness suggests you might want to secure at least one daughter's future sooner rather than later. The implication was clear. Mortality was unpredictable. Pritchard took 3 days. During that time, Margaret's condition worsened. In a brief moment alone with Caroline, Cromwell whispered, "There may be an offer of marriage coming. If it does, take it. It may be your only way out. My sisters, we can only save one at a time. If you get out, you might help them from outside." 3 days later, Pritchard summoned Caroline. "Judge Holloway has made marriage proposal. You'll wed his son James in August. I've accepted. As you wish, father. Don't mistake this for freedom. You'll still be under male authority, just your husband's. I'll maintain contact with your sisters. Any attempt to interfere with their training, and there will be consequences." "Yes, father." That night, Caroline snuck into Margaret's room. Her sister was awake, feverish but lucid. Caroline whispered, "I'm getting out. I'm going to marry Judge Holloway's son." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Leave us. I'll get help. From outside. I'll find a way to save you all. Father won't let you interfere once you're gone. Then I'll find another way. I won't abandon you." Margaret squeezed her hand weakly. "Promise me something else. Tell the truth. Whatever happens to us, make sure people know what he did. Don't let this be forgotten." "I promise." As Caroline left, she felt the weight of that promise. She was escaping, but she carried her sister's fates with her. The wedding was set for August 15th, 1848. As the date approached, tensions reached a breaking point. Pritchard intensified control over remaining daughters. Margaret's condition stabilized slightly but remained fragile. Caroline counted days, trying not to think of it as abandonment. On August 10th, 5 days before the wedding, Virginia disappeared. The alarm was raised at breakfast. Search of the house found her room empty, bed made but not slept in, riding clothes missing, one horse gone from the stable. Pritchard's rage was terrible. He organized search parties immediately. But Virginia had a full night's head start, and she'd apparently learned her father's lessons about navigation and survival better than he'd realized. For 3 days, search continued. On the third day, a farmer 30 miles north reported seeing a girl matching her description. She'd asked for water and food, then ridden on. By the time searchers reached the farm, she was long gone. Pritchard came to terrible realization. His youngest daughter had used his training to escape him. She'd taken everything he'd taught her about endurance, navigation, survival, and she'd run. And she'd done it well enough that professional trackers couldn't find her. The wedding proceeded as planned on August 15th, though celebration was muted by Virginia's disappearance. Caroline married James Holloway in small ceremony. Pritchard was present, but silent, fury at losing 2 daughters barely contained. As Caroline left Willow Bend, she looked back. Her remaining sisters, Margaret, Anne, and Elizabeth, stood in an upstairs window. She raised her hand in farewell, trying to communicate everything she couldn't say. "I'm sorry. I'll come back for you. I haven't forgotten." They raised their hands in return, 3 identical gestures, then were gone from view. Caroline had escaped, Virginia had run, but 3 daughters remained trapped, and the consequences of what had happened were only beginning to unfold. Caroline's first month as Mrs. James Holloway was strange adjustment. Her husband was kind, giving her freedom and never raising his voice. But kindness couldn't erase years of conditioning. Caroline flinched at sudden movements. She ate measured portions even when told she could have more. She woke at dawn automatically. James found her multiple times standing by windows at night, staring toward where Willow Bend lay. "You're safe now," he'd say. "My sisters aren't." She kept her promise to Margaret. She told James and Judge Holloway everything. Holloway documented it carefully. "Can we use this to remove my sisters?" Caroline asked. "Legally, no. Your testimony is compelling, but you're no longer part of his household. A court would argue you're biased. We'd need testimony from someone currently there, or physical evidence of ongoing abuse." Caroline wrote to Miss Lindley, the governess. She received no response. She wrote again. Finally, Miss Lindley sent brief note. "I am sorry, but I cannot help you. Please don't write again." Another door closing. Then, in mid-September, news arrived that changed everything. Margaret had died. Official cause: prolonged fever and weakness of constitution. Dr. Cromwell knew better. She'd died from malnutrition, exhaustion, and continued effects of whatever Pritchard had been administering. The coroner, a friend of Pritchard's, ruled the death natural. Caroline received the news sitting in the Holloway parlor. She made no sound. She simply stood, walked to her room, and didn't emerge for 3 days. When she finally came out, something had hardened. Grief had transformed into determination. "I want to see my sisters. Margaret's funeral is legitimate reason. Father can't refuse without appearing cruel." Holloway agreed, insisting on accompanying her. On September 20th, they rode to Willow Bend. It was small, grim affair, handful of neighbors. Miss Lindley red-eyed and silent. Anne and Elizabeth stood beside their father, both painfully thin, both wearing blank expressions. During the service, Caroline positioned herself beside Elizabeth. "Are you all right?" Elizabeth's response came flat and trained. "Yes, we're well." "Elizabeth, please, it's just us. Tell me the truth." For a moment, something flickered. Then she whispered, "It's worse since you left. He's angry all the time, pushes us harder, says he needs to prove his methods still work even with 2 failures. Caroline, I'm so tired. I'm going to get you out. Both of you, I promise." "How?" "Margaret tried to endure. Virginia tried to run. You tried to marry out. One is dead, one is missing, and you're gone. What's left for us?" Before Caroline could answer, Pritchard appeared between them. "Caroline, how kind of you to attend." His voice was ice. "I trust you're well." "I am. Thank you, Father." "Good. I hope you're remembering the lessons I taught you." The threat was implicit. "I remember everything you taught me, Father. Every single thing." Something dangerous flickered in his expression. Then he turned to Elizabeth. "Come, we're leaving." That night Caroline couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Elizabeth's exhausted face. She thought about Margaret, dead at 17, Virginia, missing, and she thought about her mother's last words. "Please don't let him have them alone." Everyone had failed that plea, and now one was dead, another missing. 2 remained trapped. Caroline made a decision that night. If the law wouldn't help, if society wouldn't intervene, if every legitimate path was blocked, then she'd find an illegitimate path. She was saved from having to act by unexpected arrival. On October 3rd, a stranger appeared, Reverend Thomas Hewitt from Charlotte, North Carolina. He had news about Virginia. "Your sister is alive and well. She appeared at our church 6 weeks ago, exhausted and frightened but unharmed. She told us about escaping dangerous situation. We provided shelter while we verified her account. Why didn't you notify us immediately?" "Virginia begged us not to. She was terrified of being returned. We investigated before contacting anyone." "What did your investigation find?" "Enough to convince me Virginia's fear was justified. I spoke with Dr. Cromwell, neighbors, Judge Holloway's staff. The picture was deeply troubling. Virginia is safe with us, placed with a Christian family. She's recovering, though she has nightmares. She asked me to bring you message." He handed Caroline a letter. "Caroline, I'm free. It took 3 weeks to reach Charlotte, and I thought I'd die several times, but I'm free. I used everything Father taught us to escape him. I won't come back. I can't. If I come back, he'll catch me again. I'm sorry to leave Anne and Elizabeth, but I had to save myself. I hope you understand. Please tell them I'm alive and free. Maybe that will give them hope. Love, Virginia." Caroline read 3 times, tears streaming, relief mixed with anguish. What will happen to her? The family caring for her will keep her permanently if she wishes. She'll be safe, educated, treated kindly. And my father? Virginia requested we not notify him of her location. She's 11, still legally a minor. Your father could demand her return. However, our church is prepared to resist. We have connections with organizations experienced in protecting vulnerable individuals from unjust authority. If Colonel Pritchard attempts to retrieve Virginia, he'll face a network committed to her protection. Caroline understood what he carefully wasn't saying. Organizations that helped enslaved people escape were beginning to recognize women fleeing abuse deserved similar protection. Virginia had found a network that would shield her. After Reverend Hewitt left, Caroline felt something shift. Virginia had done what seemed impossible. If an 11-year-old could do that, surely there was hope for Anne and Elizabeth. But autumn turned to winter, and hope remained elusive. Caroline made 2 more visits, both rebuffed. Pritchard sent cold letter informing her that interference was unwelcome. Miss Lindley sent brief note in early December. Elizabeth is very ill. Your father says it's influenza. Dr. Cromwell has not been called. I fear the worst." Caroline immediately rode to Willow Bend, only to be turned away. She went to the county magistrate directly, demanding intervention. The magistrate promised to inquire, but took no immediate action. 3 days later, Anne appeared at the Holloway plantation. She'd ridden through the night, arriving at dawn shaking with cold and terror. When Caroline ran out to meet her, Anne collapsed into her arms. "Elizabeth is dead. Help me." Anne had left in the middle of the night, taking a horse and riding through darkness, using navigation skills their father had drilled into her. She'd been terrified of being caught, but more terrified of staying. Elizabeth's death had shattered whatever remained of her conditioning. "She died 2 days ago," Anne told them. Father said it was influenza, but it wasn't. She'd been sick for weeks. He wouldn't let Dr. Cromwell come. He kept giving her medicines that made her worse. She was delirious at the end, calling for Mother. Where is she now? Father buried her yesterday, quick and private, no formal funeral. He just looked at her grave and said her constitution had been too weak, that not every subject survives the conditioning process. Like she was an experiment that failed. Judge Holloway made careful notes. "Anne, I need you to tell me everything. Every detail about the training, punishments, medicines. Your testimony may be what we finally need." Over 3 hours, Anne provided the most complete account yet. Daily regimen, food restrictions, isolation punishments, medications. She showed scars on her back from being struck with a riding crop when she'd failed exercises. She explained how training intensified after Margaret's death. She also provided information neither Caroline nor Virginia had known. Father kept detailed records, everything documented, measurements, timings, drug dosages. He called them research logs. He kept them locked in his study, but Elizabeth found where he hid the key. She copied parts sometimes. Do you know where Elizabeth's copies are? Hidden in her room, behind a loose board near the window. We need those records. That's the physical evidence we've been lacking. Judge Holloway filed petition the next morning. The magistrate, under pressure from growing scandal, granted limited investigation. County official would visit Willow Bend to verify Anne's claims. Pritchard fought the order but had limited options. On December 15, 1848, a small party arrived. County official, Judge Holloway, Dr. Cromwell, 2 deputies. They had authorization to interview staff, examine premises, retrieve relevant documents. What they found was worse than imagined. The training facility contained equipment Cromwell described as instruments of systematic torture disguised as exercise devices. The main house showed signs of rigid, prison-like control, locks on doors, windows barred from outside, rooms stripped of comfort. But the records proved most damning. In Pritchard's study, 9 years of meticulously documented research logs. He'd recorded everything, written about his daughters the way a scientist writes about laboratory subjects. One entry, 2 weeks after Margaret's death. Subject M's failure highlights importance of careful screening. Her constitution proved insufficient. This suggests need for either reduced intensity or selection of only most physically robust subjects for future applications. Remaining subjects show more promising resilience, though subject E displays concerning deterioration. Behind the loose board in Elizabeth's room, her copies of selected entries along with a note. "If I die, please let someone know this happened. Please don't let him say I was just sick. He killed us slowly and called it science." The county official emerged pale and shaken. He ordered Elizabeth's body exhumed. Dr. Cromwell conducted autopsy and found advanced malnutrition, multiple poorly healed fractures, and organs showing signs of chemical poisoning. Legal proceedings followed, groundbreaking but frustratingly limited. South Carolina in 1848 had no framework for prosecuting parental abuse. But Pritchard's documentation created unique situation. His own logs proved he'd administered substances he knew were potentially harmful, deliberately pushed daughters beyond sustainable limits, viewed their deterioration and deaths as data points. The prosecutor charged him with reckless endangerment resulting in death, not murder, which would require proving intent, but actions showing such gross disregard for human life they crossed into criminality even within era's lax standards. The trial lasted 3 weeks in early 1849. Caroline and Anne testified, as did Dr. Cromwell, Miss Lindley, several household staff. Pritchard's defense argued he'd been conducting legitimate scientific research, that deaths were tragic accidents from constitutional weaknesses, that his methods were within his rights. The jury was divided. After 2 days of deliberation, guilty of reckless endangerment, sentence of 10 years in prison. Simultaneously a legal victory and devastating commentary. 2 young women had died from systematic abuse spanning 9 years, and their father received a sentence that might see him released before 40. But it was also the first time in South Carolina history a father had been criminally convicted for how he'd treated his own children. The precedent, however limited, had been set. Nathaniel Pritchard served 7 years before dying in prison in 1856 from pneumonia. His will left everything to his faithful daughters, but by then only Caroline and Anne remained to inherit. Virginia had been legally declared emancipated in 1850, free from his authority, but excluded from his will. The Willow Bend plantation was sold. Neither Caroline nor Anne could bear to keep it. Anne used her share to establish a small school in Charleston for girls. She never married, dedicating her life to teaching. Caroline remained with the Holloways. She and James had 3 daughters, whom she raised with deliberate gentleness. She kept Elizabeth's note and selected pages from her father's logs. Virginia remained in North Carolina, taking the family name of those who'd sheltered her. She grew up, married, had children. She maintained correspondence with Caroline, but never returned to South Carolina. In letters, she wrote that nightmares eventually faded, but never entirely disappeared. In 1883, after Caroline's death at 52, her personal papers were donated to Charleston Historical Society. Among them, her journal, Elizabeth's note, copies of their father's research logs, and a letter Caroline had written but never sent, dated 1849. To those who read this in the future, my father believed he could perfect human beings through systematic control. He believed natural limitations could be overcome through sufficient rigor. He was wrong. What he proved instead was that cruelty can wear the mask of science, that absolute power corrupts even paternal love, and that human beings can rationalize any horror if they view their victims as experiments rather than people. 2 of my sisters died because of his obsession. 3 of us survived by escaping him. I pray that by the time these papers are read, society has learned to protect children from those who would harm them, even when those harming them are their own parents. I leave this record hoping it serves as warning, as testimony, and as memorial to Margaret and Elizabeth Pritchard, who deserved so much better. The papers were archived and largely forgotten for decades. In 1910, a researcher studying child welfare laws discovered them. Her published analysis became part of the growing movement to establish legal protections for children, contributing to reforms that would slowly begin to limit parental authority and establish children's rights as distinct from parental property rights. The Willow Bend property changed hands multiple times before being subdivided. By 1900, nothing remained of original plantation buildings except the family cemetery, where 4 markers stood side by side. Elizabeth Pritchard, 1834-1848, Margaret Pritchard, 1831-1848, and 2 smaller markers for their parents. But there's a 5th grave too, one that appeared sometime in the early 1900s with no official record. The marker reads, "To those who suffer in silence, may truth eventually find voice." Local historians have never determined who placed it or who might be buried beneath. The truth did find voice, though slowly and imperfectly. The Pritchard case became a footnote in legal history, cited occasionally in discussions of parental rights and child welfare. The full horror remained largely unknown outside academic circles, until now. The records preserved by Caroline tell a story that deserves to be remembered, not as anomaly, but as example of how unchecked authority, rationalized cruelty, and systematic dehumanization can occur anywhere, even in respectable households, even in the name of improvement and progress. The Pritchard daughters, Caroline, Margaret, Anne, Elizabeth, and Virginia, deserved better. They deserved safety, love, normal childhoods, futures free from terror. Most got none of those things, but through their testimony and courage, in speaking truth even when society didn't want to listen, they left something valuable. Proof that they existed, that they suffered, and that what happened to them was wrong. That proof matters. Every voice raised against cruelty matters. Every record preserved matters. Every person who refuses to look away matters. The Pritchard sisters learned that too late for Margaret and Elizabeth, but not too late for their memory. What do you think happened at Willow Bend? Do you believe systematic abuse could be disguised as education and research, even today? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, share it with someone who appreciates dark historical mysteries. Subscribe to Liturgy of Fear for more forgotten true stories from America's past, and hit that notification bell. Until next time, remember, the past may be gone, but its lessons echo forward, waiting for those willing to listen.